Humanity was never feared. Not in the early days of the galactic conquered, and not in the centuries that followed. They were catalogued the way one catalogues surviving insects after a fire, remarkable only in their refusal to disappear. Their worlds were marked low priority. Their fleets were described as legacy tier. Their military doctrine was considered historical curiosity at best. And yet humanity endured. Not loudly, not aggressively. Silently, on the edge of known space, beyond the jurisdiction of the major empires, drifted the dead moon Kairos 9. Official records listed it as an abandoned mining husk, stripped of resources and written off generations ago. No one bothered to look twice. That was exactly why humanity chose it. Deep beneath its iron-crusted surface, kilometers of tunneling machinery carved out a secret the galaxy would have called impossible if it had ever bothered to notice. The project had no official name in public archives, only a designation buried in encrypted human military channels. Project Railgun. Inside the subterranean facility, heat shimmered through reinforced corridors. Massive coils, each the size of a capital ship hull, lined a cylindrical chamber that extended deeper than any natural cave system should allow. Power flowed through them in rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat trying to learn how to become something else. Commander Elias Venn stood on the observation platform, watching the final alignment sequence begin. He didn't look like a conqueror. No armor, no medals on display, just a worn uniform and eyes that had stopped reacting to stress long ago. Behind him, technicians moved in controlled urgency. Every motion had been rehearsed, every variable accounted for. Still, no one spoke above a whisper. Because what they were building was not meant to exist. A young engineer broke the silence anyway. "Sir, if the calibration drifts even 0.003%, the magnetic shear will collapse the entire barrel." Another voice answered without looking up. "Then we don't let it drift." "That's not how physics works," the engineer replied. Elias finally turned slightly. "It is now." The statement was not arrogance. It was exhaustion made absolute. Outside, through kilometers of rock, the surface of Kairos 9 remained quiet. No storms, no signs of life, only the cold indifference of a moon that had already been erased from galactic attention. And above it, space traffic began to change. A standard patrol formation from the Archon Dominion entered orbital vector. 12 warships, sleek, confident, unchallenged for centuries. Their presence alone was enough to erase lesser civilizations. They were not here for war. They were here for inspection. A routine sweep of forgotten systems. A reminder of hierarchy. On the moon below, sensors picked them up instantly. "Orbital entry confirmed," a technician said. Elias nodded once. "They're early." "They're not supposed to be here at all," someone muttered. Elias stepped forward toward the command console. The railgun core beneath the facility pulsed brighter, reacting to his proximity like a sleeping beast recognizing its handler. "System status?" he asked. A pause. Then nominal barely. The coil structure groaned faintly, like metal remembering it was never meant to hold this much force. The weapon chamber extended upward through the moon's crust, an impossibly straight tunnel aimed into open space. At its end, a projectile the size of a human fist floated in magnetic suspension. It looked harmless. That was the most terrifying part. Because everything humanity had learned about destruction told them weapons should look like storms. This did not. This looked like certainty. Above them, the Archon fleet adjusted formation. A casual maneuver, a display of control. Elias watched it all without blinking. A technician swallowed. "We're getting passive scans." "Let them scan," Elias said. "They're logging gravitational anomalies near the surface." "Good," Elias replied. "Let them wonder." The final charge cycle began. Massive energy banks deep within the moon began emptying into the rail system. The entire structure vibrated, not violently, but precisely, like a sentence being spoken too perfectly to interrupt. The air itself felt compressed. A scientist whispered, "We're crossing the threshold." "No," Elias corrected softly. "We crossed that years ago." Now came confirmation. Above them, one of the alien ships altered trajectory slightly, a response to an unknown reading, curiosity. That single movement sealed their fate. A targeting solution locked in instantly. No hesitation. No delay. The system didn't calculate probability. It calculated inevitability. On the console, a simple prompt appeared. Target locked. The room fell silent. Even the machinery seemed to pause, as if waiting for permission to become history. A technician's hands trembled over the manual override. Sir, final confirmation required. Ilya stared at the live feed of the orbiting fleet. 12 ships. 12 empires, arrogance compressed into steel and confidence. He exhaled once. Not fear. Not hesitation. Just release. Yes, he said. A beat of silence. Then, fire. For a fraction of a moment, nothing changed. Then Karo's 9 answered. The railgun fired. And the moon did not explode. It redefined distance. Space folded in a line so precise it had no visible existence. The projectile did not travel. It arrived. Above the moon, one of the Archon ships simply ceased to exist mid-orbit. No explosion, no debris field, no warning signal. Then a second. Then a third. The formation broke instantly, confusion spreading faster than light-based communication could resolve. On Karo's 9, alarms didn't trigger. They couldn't keep up. Ilya's watched the sky go silent. Not empty. Silent. And in that silence, the remaining alien ships began to realize something was wrong. Not with their sensors. Not with their fleet. But with the very idea that they were still in control of anything at all. And the surviving captain of the Archon patrol finally opened a channel, uttering the first words of a galaxy about to understand fear. What was that? The first message the Archon Dominion received was not a report. It was a gap. A missing segment in orbital tracking where 12 warships should have existed but no longer did. The system did not flag destruction. It did not register combat. It simply showed null continuity, as if reality had forgotten to keep those objects in place. On the Dominion flagship, silence stretched longer than protocol allowed. Then the alarms began. Not frantic, not immediate. Confused. High Regent Kale Vorn stood in the central command chamber, staring at the tactical holo display. The glowing map of Karo's 9 orbit rotated slowly, repeating the same impossible absence. 12 ships, he said finally. No one answered. Where are they? He asked louder. A sensor officer swallowed hard. We don't have a trace, Your Excellency. Kale turned sharply, lost contact. A pause. Not lost, the officer corrected carefully. Erased. There is no residual debris field, no radiation spike, no propulsion residue. It is as if they were never there. The words hung in the air like a malfunctioning truth. Kale's expression tightened. Every weapon leaves evidence. A scientist stepped forward, voice unsteady. Not if the interaction occurs below measurable reaction thresholds or above detectable response time. Kale stared at him. Translate that. The scientist hesitated. Something hit them, he said slowly, before they could recognize they were being hit. A ripple of unease spread through the command bridge. Impossible. The Archon Dominion had fought wars across star clusters. They had survived relativistic ambushes, phase-shift artillery, even singularity mines. Nothing arrived without being seen arriving. And yet, 12 ships were gone. Kale clenched his fists. Replay the last transmission. The holo projector flickered. Static. Then silence. No distress calls, no combat logs, no last words. Just a cut in continuity. As if 12 warships had collectively decided not to exist anymore. Kale's voice dropped dangerously. Send a second fleet. A general blinked. Your Excellency. Send a second fleet. The order echoed across command channels within seconds. Elsewhere in the galaxy, engines ignited. Warships turned. And Karo's 9, still quiet beneath its crust, received the next wave of attention it had not asked for. On the moon, deep underground, the human facility reacted instantly. New contacts inbound, a technician reported. How many? Elias asked. A pause. Then 36 signatures, heavy class. No reaction from Elias at first. He simply studied the readout. Then he nodded once. They escalated fast. A nervous engineer spoke. They think it was a fluke. Elias didn't look up. No. Then what? They think we're still in the phase where mistakes are possible. Above them, space began to fill. The second Archon fleet arrived like a closing net. Precision formation, layered shielding, overlapping fire arcs designed to erase anything that resisted the first encounter. They had learned from the missing fleet. They had corrected for unknowns. They believed in adaptation. On Karo's 9, the Railgun system began its recharge cycle again. This time slower. Strained. The moon itself seemed to groan under the redistribution of energy. A technician wiped sweat from his brow. We can't sustain repeated firing at this output, the barrel integrity. I know, Elias interrupted calmly. Then why? Because they're watching, Elias said. And indeed, above them, alien sensors were watching everything. Every fluctuation, every pulse of energy, every sign of weakness. The second fleet began orbital descent. Cale Vorn himself now stood aboard the command vessel leading the formation. He had come personally, not out of necessity, but out of refusal to believe fear without witnessing its source. His voice echoed through fleet-wide channels. Whatever destroyed the first group will not repeat its anomaly. We adapt, we correct, we eliminate. Thousands of weapons systems powered in synchronization. On Karo's 9, the Railgun's targeting array expanded. Elias stepped forward again. The same calm posture. The same silence. But something in the room felt heavier now, not fear but expectation. A technician whispered, "If we fire again, they'll respond with full planetary suppression." Elias nodded, "Yes. And we can't survive that." Another pause. Elias finally looked at him. "We already decided to fire anyway." The technician froze. Above them, the second fleet completed orbital positioning. 36 warships. Perfect geometry. Perfect confidence. Cale Vorn issued the command. Begin suppression sequence. Weapons charged. Shields tightened. And for the first time since the Dominion had risen to power, they prepared not for victory, but for correction. On Karo's 9, the Railgun reached firing readiness again. The system asked for confirmation. Elias stared at the sky, not at the ships, at what they represented. Order, authority, assumption. He spoke softly. Fire. The moon responded instantly. The second shot did not feel like movement. It felt like absence choosing a direction. Space folded again, and the galaxy learned a new kind of silence. One that followed not destruction, but realization. Because halfway through their descent, the Archon fleet's formation broke. Not from impact, but from something far worse. Prediction failure. Every defensive algorithm they ran returned the same impossible result. No survival state EXISDS after this moment. Cale Vorn's eyes widened as his command interface began deleting tactical options on its own. One by one, as if the universe itself had refused permission for alternatives. And then, the second fleet began to vanish from orbit. While Cale Vorn whispered the first word that had never belonged in Archon military doctrine. No, the disappearance of the second fleet was not immediate. It was systematic, like a sentence being erased one character at a time from reality itself. On Karo's 9, the Railgun's recoil dampers hummed down from peak stress, but no one celebrated. No one even moved, because for the first time something had changed in the sky that did not feel like victory. It felt like attention. Inside the Archon Dominion command sphere, Cale Vorn stood frozen as his tactical display began to fracture. Entire fleet clusters blinked out of formation tracking. Not destroyed. Not lost. Untracked. A systems officer shouted, "We're losing synchronization across all squadrons." "That's impossible," Cale snapped. But even as he said it, he saw it happen. 36 warships reduced to scattered, flickering signatures, each one vanishing not in sequence of attack, but in sequence of understanding. Something was learning them. Or worse, something had already learned them. On Karos 9, Elias Ven watched the incoming data feed stabilize again. The silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one had weight. A technician whispered, "They're not just reacting anymore." Elias nodded once, "They're interpreting." Another engineer leaned closer to the console. "Sir, we're receiving a signal." Elias paused. That was new. "Source." "Everywhere," the engineer said, voice breaking slightly. "It's not localized. It's embedded in the carrier wave of their fleet systems." The railgun room went still. Elias stepped forward, put it through. The projection flickered into existence. At first it was noise, structured noise, then patterns emerged, then translation layers began auto-aligning. The message wasn't a voice. It was a compiled understanding. "We observe the event." A pause. 12 UNITS lost. Another pause. Then, 36 UNITS lost. The words were not accusatory. They were analytical. On Karos 9, a technician whispered, "They're cataloging us." Elias' eyes narrowed slightly. "No. They're modeling us." The transmission continued. Cause unknown weapon class. Classification, non-traditional physics event. Adaptation required. The words shifted. Elias stepped closer to the console. "They're trying to define it." A scientist behind him spoke carefully. "If they define it, they can counter it." Elias didn't respond immediately. Because that was the truth no one wanted to say out loud. On the other side of orbit, the surviving fragments of the Archon fleet were no longer behaving like a military force. They were behaving like a research body under fire. Cale Vorn's voice cut through fleet channels. "Stop analyzing and fire everything we have left." But something had changed. The fleet did not obey instantly, because the systems were no longer confident in command hierarchy. They were prioritizing survival prediction models over direct orders. And every model was converging toward the same conclusion. Engagement result, non-survivable. On Karos 9, alarms began to rise again. Not from attack, from observation density. "They're scanning us at full spectrum now," a technician said urgently. "Quantum, gravitational, temporal drift, everything." Elias watched the readings. "They're trying to see the moment before the shot," he said quietly. A nervous engineer replied, "Can they?" Elias' expression didn't change. "No." Above them, the remaining Archon vessels shifted formation again. This time not for attack. For containment. A sphere. A surrounding structure of overlapping fire vectors designed to isolate the moon completely. Cale Vorn had given up on simple retaliation. Now he wanted control. "Lock Karos 9 in a suppression envelope," he ordered. "If the weapon fires again, we contain the entire event footprint." The fleet responded. Energy fields began forming in space, massive lattice structures of gravitational interference and electromagnetic compression. On Karos 9, the technicians watched the sky darken. "It's not just a siege anymore," one whispered. "It's a cage." Elias studied the readings for a long moment, then said softly, "Good." A technician turned sharply, "Good." Elias didn't look away from the data stream. Now they're committing fully. The railgun core beneath the moon began to shift. Not charging. Reconfiguring. A deeper hum spread through the facility, one that had not been active during either previous firing. A scientist noticed first. "Sir, secondary systems are activating." Elias nodded. Yes. The engineer frowned, but we never authorized. I did, Elias interrupted. Silence followed. Outside, the Archon containment lattice reached 73% completion. Cale Vorn watched it carefully. This will hold anything, he said firmly. Nothing passes through this structure without being processed, slowed, and destroyed. A fleet officer hesitated, even that weapon. Cale hesitated for the first time, then answered anyway. Especially that weapon. On Karos 9, the Railgun's targeting system suddenly expanded its range. Far beyond orbit. Beyond fleet density. Beyond visible space. A technician stepped back. That's not possible, there's nothing in range. Elias finally turned. And for the first time, his voice carried something sharper than calm. There is now. The system locked onto the containment lattice itself. Not the ships. Not the commanders. The structure. A new targeting solution appeared. Not labeled. Not categorized. Just calculated. The railgun prepared to fire again. And across the galaxy, both sides realized the same terrifying truth at the exact same moment. This was no longer a battle between fleets. It was a battle between definitions of what range meant. And the system asked once again. Fire? Elias answered. But before the word left his mouth, Cale Vorn saw something impossible on his tactical screen. The containment lattice had already been marked as already impacted. Before the shot was fired, the moment the containment lattice was marked already impacted, every command structure in the Archon Dominion stopped trusting its own data. Not because systems had failed, but because they had worked too well. Across the fleet encircling Karos 9, commanders stared at synchronized displays that no longer behaved like instruments, but like predictions that refused to be challenged. Cale Vorn's hands tightened on the command console. That's not possible, he said again, quieter this time. A tactical officer responded carefully. Your Excellency, all probability trees converge on the same outcome. Change the model, Cale snapped. We did, the officer replied, 7 times. Silence followed. Outside the command vessel, the containment lattice continued forming, massive interwoven structures of gravitational distortion and energy compression. It wrapped around Karos 9 like a net designed not to capture a weapon, but to capture the idea of one. And yet, every simulation kept returning the same result. Failure already occurred. On Karos 9, deep beneath the surface, the railgun chamber pulsed with unfamiliar intensity. Not escalation. Expansion. A technician whispered, Sir, secondary rail systems are syncing with the primary array. Elias didn't look up. They're responding to containment. A scientist frowned. That's not a response pattern we programmed. Elias finally turned. No, he said, it's not ours anymore. Above them, the sky had become a structure of warships and lattice fields. Light bent unnaturally between overlapping containment zones, creating fractured shadows across the moon's surface. The galaxy had united something unprecedented. 7 crown empires. One shared objective. Erase the anomaly. Cale Vorn activated the galactic broadcast channel. His face appeared across every fleet, every command node, every listening post within the sector. This ends now, he declared. We are not facing a rebellion, we are not facing a war. A pause. We are facing a statistical error. On Karos 9, Elias heard the transmission in real time. A technician muttered, They're calling us an error. Elias replied calmly, That's the first honest thing they've said. Above them, the containment lattice reached full structural lock. A massive web of overlapping fields sealed orbital escape vectors. No ship could leave. No signal could pass without distortion. Even gravitational drift was being suppressed into predictable bands. Cale Vorn raised his hand. Begin total suppression sequence. Every fleet weapon charged simultaneously. Entire wings of capital ships aligned their cannons toward the moon. Not firing yet. Waiting. because now they believed they had control. And control required patience. On Karos 9, the railgun system began a deep, resonant shift. The sound changed. It was no longer a mechanical hum. It was closer to space adjusting its posture. A technician stepped back slowly. That's new, that frequency wasn't in the original design. Elias nodded once. It's not in the original universe either. The engineer turned sharply. Sir. But Elias was already watching the tactical overlay. The railgun wasn't targeting the fleet. It was targeting the containment lattice. And something beneath it. A deeper layer of calculation appeared. One no one had seen before. A field marked only as EXTRNLIZD structure, hostile frame. A scientist whispered, "What does that mean?" Elias answered without hesitation. "It means they stopped attacking us." A pause, and started attacking the space we're in. Above them, Cale Vorn gave the final command. Fire. The galaxy responded. Hundreds of capital-class weapons discharged in synchronized sequence. Energy lances, plasma collapses, gravitic spears, all converging on Karos 9 in a single coordinated annihilation wave. For a fraction of a moment, it looked like certainty. On Karos 9, every system went silent. Then the railgun fired. But it did not fire upward. It fired outward. Not toward ships. Not toward weapons. But toward the structure holding all of them in place. The containment lattice shuddered. For the first time, it was no longer stable. Cale Vorn's eyes widened as every tactical display across the fleet flickered red simultaneously. Impact confirmed, a voice whispered. Another officer shouted, "No, this is impossible. There's no projectile path through the lattice geometry." But the displays didn't lie. The lattice had already been struck. Not physically, structurally. And then, the first section of the containment net vanished. Not destroyed. Invalidated. A second followed. Then a third. Across the fleet, panic finally broke through discipline. Because they were no longer fighting a weapon. They were fighting the assumptions their own universe depended on. Cale Vorn whispered almost to himself. "We didn't trap them." A pause. "We built the thing they needed to break us." And on Karos 9, Elias watched the sky begin to unravel, knowing the galaxy had just made its first real mistake. By assuming the battlefield was something that could still hold them, the containment lattice did not collapse like a structure under stress. It forgot how to exist. One segment vanished, then another, not in chaotic destruction, but in orderly unmaking, as if every anchored point in space had simultaneously lost its reason to remain connected. Across the Archon fleet, alarms didn't scream. They hesitated. Systems attempted to recompile spatial integrity models, only to find that the models themselves were returning empty definitions. Cale Vorn stared at the tactical display as it fractured into incomplete geometry. "Reports," he demanded. A fleet analyst answered, voice tight. "Containment nodes not destroyed, they are unresolved." Cale turned sharply, meaning. The analyst swallowed, meaning our system can no longer confirm they ever existed in a stable state. Silence followed. Not fear yet. Not fully. Just the slow cracking of certainty. On Karos 9, deep beneath the iron crust, the railgun core pulsed with a rhythm that no longer matched any known engineering cycle. A technician stepped back from the console. "Sir, it's not following charge protocols anymore." Elias watched the readouts carefully. "It's not charging," he said. "What is it doing then?" Elias paused. "It's deciding how reality should behave after it fires." That sentence should have meant nothing, but everyone in the chamber felt its weight anyway. Above them, the Archon fleets attempted recovery. Secondary formations restructured. Emergency doctrines activated. Shield harmonics rebalanced across thousands of ships. But every adjustment now came with hesitation. Because the battlefield was no longer consistent. And inconsistency was something empires did not survive for long. Kale Vorn activated a direct fleet-wide channel. All units maintain suppression posture. This is a localized anomaly. We contain it, we analyze it, and we eliminate it. A pause. Then a voice replied, not from his officers, but from an automated system. Warning, suppression posture, INVLIDATS, future state, PREDICTONS. Kale froze. What does that mean? He snapped. A scientist on his bridge answered quietly. It means the act of containing them is what makes containment impossible. Kale's expression hardened. Shut it down. We can't, the scientist said. It's derived from predictive recursion loops. The system is evaluating itself as an input. On Karos 9, Elias turned slightly as the railgun chamber began a new phase sequence. A technician spoke nervously. We're getting something unusual from the target lattice fragments. Show me, Elias said. The projection flickered. Fragments of the containment structure were still visible in orbit, but now they weren't stable shapes. They were flickering between states, as if unsure whether they were supposed to be broken or still functional. Then a new layer appeared. Not from human systems. Not from Archon systems. A third classification. Unlabeled. A scientist whispered, that's not part of either architecture. Elias narrowed his eyes. No, he said slowly. That's what happens when both architectures stop agreeing on what space is. Above them, the remaining Archon ships began firing again, desperate now, not coordinated. Energy weapons lanced toward the moon in overlapping waves. But halfway through travel, their trajectories began to drift. Not due to interference, but due to recalculation. Each weapon system was independently revising its understanding of target location. And every revision made impact less certain. Kale Vorn slammed his fist on the console. Why are the weapons deviating? A weapons officer shouted back. They're not deviating, they're updating coordinate truth mid-flight. Stop them. We can't. The guidance systems are deferring to newer spatial definitions. On Karos 9, the railgun's final stabilization phase initiated. The chamber didn't glow brighter this time. It grew quieter, as if all unnecessary energy had been stripped away, leaving only the final instruction. Define outcome. A technician whispered, it's never done that before. Elias stepped closer. This is the difference, he said softly, between a weapon. He paused, and a correction system. The railgun locked onto the remaining lattice fragments. But something was wrong. Or perhaps something had already changed. Because the targeting solution was no longer singular. It had multiplied, not into multiple targets, but multiple versions of reality. A scientist stepped back. It's calculating outcomes across divergent space states. Elias nodded. Yes, and selecting the one where they never stabilize again. Above them, Kale Vorn's fleet suddenly went silent. Not communication silence. Operational silence. Every system simultaneously paused its firing cycle. A fleet officer whispered, they've stopped shooting. Kale narrowed his eyes. No, they haven't stopped. A pause. They're waiting for something. On Karos 9, Elias understood. The railgun wasn't waiting for permission. It was waiting for certainty. And when it found it, the shot would not travel. It would finalize. A technician spoke quietly. Sir, if this fires, there won't be another cycle. Elias didn't look away from the projection. I know. Outside, the fractured lattice flickered one last time. Trying, failing, then stabilizing into a final pattern. A last attempt at coherence. The system on Karos 9 responded instantly. The firing solution finalized. And in that exact moment, Kale Vorn realized the truth no empire ever survives hearing. They were not being attacked by a weapon. They were being tested by one. And the test had just reached its answer. The answer arrived without sound. Not a detonation. Not a wave. Not even a visible shift at first. Just a single, absolute moment where every Archon system across the fleet agreed on one thing. The battlefield has changed state. Then the sky broke. Not physically, at least not in the way anyone understood breaking. The remaining fragments of the containment lattice did not collapse outward or implode inward. They simply lost synchronization with each other, like a vast machine whose parts had all decided on different laws of motion. On Karos 9, alarms surged again, but even those felt delayed, as if panic itself had to be recalculated before being expressed. A technician stared at the readouts. "We didn't destroy the lattice." Elias finished the sentence quietly. "We invalidated its structure." Above the moon, the Archon fleets finally began their full siege protocol. Cale Vorn's voice echoed across all channels. Total engagement. No hesitation, no observation, no further modeling. Eliminate the target. For the first time, he did not wait for system confirmation. He bypassed prediction layers entirely. The galaxy responded like a wounded animal, finally choosing instinct over analysis. Hundreds of capital weapons fired simultaneously. Energy beams converged. Gravity lances folded space. Plasma arrays ignited into sustained stellar burns. The sky over Karos 9 became a continuous storm of controlled annihilation. And for a moment, it looked like the end of everything. Inside the underground facility, the air pressure shifted violently. Dust lifted from the floor. Warning lights flickered across the ceiling like nervous stars. A technician shouted, "We're taking direct multi-vector impact." Another screamed, "Shields are holding at 11%. Elias did not move. He simply watched the incoming storm through layered tactical projections. A scientist beside him whispered, "No structure survives this." Elias replied, "Then it won't be a structure that survives." The railgun system beneath the moon began its final transition. Not charging, not aiming, synchronizing. Across hidden installations scattered through dead space, dormant human systems responded. Relay nodes that had not activated in centuries blinked awake. Forgotten calibration beacons aligned themselves with the present moment. The network was waking. On the surface of Karos 9, the sky began to distort in response. Not from impact, from coordination. Cale Vorn saw it immediately. His tactical display flickered violently. "What is that?" he demanded. A fleet analyst responded, voice shaking. "It's not a weapon signature, it's a distributed response pattern." Translate. The analyst swallowed. "It means the moon is not firing at us." A pause. "It means everything around us is firing together." Cale's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." But even as he said it, ships began disappearing again. Not in clusters this time. Not in patterns. In agreement failures. Every time an Archon weapon locked onto Karos 9, its targeting system revised itself mid-calculation. And every revision introduced uncertainty. And uncertainty at this scale was fatal. On Karos 9, Elias finally spoke again. "Phase alignment complete." A technician looked up sharply. "Phase alignment with what?" Elias didn't answer immediately. "Then, with the version of reality where they never surrounded us correctly." The railgun chamber deep beneath the moon opened further than geometry should allow. Its barrel no longer looked like a tunnel of metal, but like a boundary between possible outcomes. The first human railgun had been a line through space. This was something else entirely. A correction across probability itself. Above them, Cale Vorn's fleet began to fracture. Ships that had been perfectly positioned moments ago now found themselves slightly out of phase with coordinated targeting systems. Shields overlapped incorrectly. Fire arcs intersected their own formations. A senior officer shouted, "We're losing formation integrity." Cale snapped, "Recalculate." "We are. Every recalculation returns a different fleet configuration." Cale froze. For the first time, he understood something terrifying. The enemy was not disrupting their systems. The enemy was allowing their systems to continue functioning. just not in the same reality twice. On Kairos 9, the Railgun's final lock engaged. The entire underground facility went silent. Not because systems failed, because they finished their last instruction. Elias looked at the tactical feed. The storm above the moon had reached maximum density. Entire fleets now formed overlapping layers of fire and containment, attempting to compress the battlefield into submission. Cale Vorn gave one final order. Erase it, all of it. Every weapon fired again. Every system committed. Every empire, every doctrine, every assumption of superiority condensed into a single unified act of force. And for a fraction of a second, there was no Kairos 9 in the sky. Only impact. Then the railgun fired. Not upward, not outward, but through the definition of impact itself. The storm stopped. Not suddenly, not explosively, but as if someone had removed the idea of continuation. Entire sections of the Archon fleet simply failed to transition into their next planned moment. Cale Vorn's eyes widened, because he was still alive, and so were a few ships. But the siege was gone. Not defeated, not repelled, just no longer a valid configuration of space. And in the silence that followed, Cale finally whispered, "What did we just fire into?" For the first time since the siege began, Kairos 9 was not under active bombardment. But that did not mean peace had arrived. It meant something worse had finished adjusting. Above the moon, the surviving Archon fleet hung in scattered formation. No longer a siege wall, no longer a unified force. Just fragments of command structures trying to agree on what after impact was supposed to look like. Cale Vorn stood on the bridge of his command vessel, staring at the tactical display. It refused to stabilize. Every refresh cycle produced a different battlefield. "Report," he said, voice controlled but thin. A systems officer hesitated. "We can't confirm fleet cohesion anymore." Cale turned sharply. "We still have ships." "Yes, Your Excellency, but they are not agreeing on spatial continuity." A pause. Cale's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The officer swallowed. "Some ships are reporting they are still in the firing phase, others are reporting they were destroyed, and a few are reporting they never entered orbit." Silence spread across the bridge. Not fear yet. Confusion trying to become fear. On Kairos 9, deep beneath the surface, Elias Venn stood motionless in the command chamber. The railgun system was no longer humming with energy. It was idle. But not inactive. A technician spoke carefully. "Sir, the network didn't shut down, it just stopped acknowledging input." Elias nodded slightly. "It's done what it was designed to do." "And what is that?" the technician asked. Elias replied, "It finished the version of the universe where we lose." Above them, something began to change in orbit. The remaining Archon ships attempted to regroup, but every maneuver they initiated was subtly misaligned from the others, not due to error, but due to disagreement in fundamental measurement. Distances no longer matched across systems. Timestamps drifted out of sync. Even communication delays varied between ships in ways that made coordination impossible. Cale Vorn slammed his fist against the console. "Why are we not synchronized?" A scientist on the bridge answered quietly, "Because synchronization requires shared reference frames. And we no longer share one." Cale froze. Outside the viewport, stars flickered. Not exploding. Not dying. Misaligning. Some blinked out for certain ships and remained visible for others. Some appeared closer than they should. Others seemed duplicated, like echoes of positions that no longer agreed on where they belonged. A fleet officer whispered, "The sky is breaking." Cale snapped, "No, the sky does not break." But even as he said it, he knew it was no longer true. On Kairos 9, Elias finally turned toward the projection console. A technician spoke urgently. "We're receiving fragmented transmissions from remaining Archon vessels." Elias nodded. "Put them through." The projection flickered. But instead of one message, There were many overlapping versions. A captain screaming about destruction that had already happened. Another insisting the battle had not begun yet. Another calmly reporting mission completion. All at once, all incompatible. The system struggled to reconcile them. Then failed. A scientist whispered, "Their communication network is collapsing into contradictory timelines." Elias corrected softly, "Not timelines. A pause. Interpretations." Above them, Cale Vorn stood silently on his bridge. For the first time, no one was giving him reliable data. No fleet report. No unified sensor feed. Even the tactical map had stopped behaving like a map. It had become a collection of disagreements. Then the worst message arrived. A system alert from Central Fleet Coordination. Warning, observed reality no longer consistent with command authority. Cale stared at it. "Who sent that?" he demanded. No one answered, because no system could identify a sender anymore. On Karos 9, Elias watched the sky carefully. "What's happening up there?" a technician asked. Elias answered after a long pause. "They're learning what it feels like," he said, "when victory has too many definitions to survive contact with itself." Above the moon, Archon ships began to separate, not physically at first, but logically. Some fleets began firing at empty coordinates. Others held fire, convinced the war was already over. A few attempted retreat trajectories that no longer existed in shared space. Cale Vorn's voice cut through all channels one final time. "Consolidate perception, ignore contradictory feeds, maintain unified doctrine." But doctrine required agreement. And agreement required reality. And reality was no longer singular. On Karos 9, the Railgun system suddenly emitted a final low-frequency pulse. Not a shot. Not a charge. A confirmation. A technician whispered, "Sir, it's stabilizing." Elias nodded, "Yes." "What does that mean?" Elias looked at the sky. "It means they've stopped being one war." A pause, and started being many mistakes at once. Above them, Cale Vorn saw something that broke him more than any explosion could have. Some of his ships were still fighting. Some were retreating. Some were broadcasting victory reports. All at the same time. And none of them agreed which one was real. The stars above Karos 9 flickered one final time. Not dying. Not moving. Just no longer agreeing on where they were supposed to be. And Cale Vorn whispered into the chaos, "We didn't lose the battle." A long pause. "We lost the meaning of it," was no final explosion. No decisive annihilation. No last stand worthy of the histories the Archon Dominion liked to write about itself. Instead, the war ended the way it had begun, quietly, invisibly, and in a way no empire had ever prepared for. It simply stopped being the same event across all observers. On Karos 9, deep beneath the iron crust, the Railgun network powered down into a dormant state that did not feel like shutdown. It felt like completion. Technicians moved carefully through the command chamber, expecting collapse, retaliation, or residual instability. Instead, they found silence, structured, intentional, almost respectful. A young engineer broke it first. "Is it over?" No one answered immediately. Because over required agreement on what had been happening. Elias Venn stood at the central console, watching the final fragments of Archon fleet data fade from the tactical feeds. Not erased, not destroyed. Just no longer aligning with anything still active. A technician spoke quietly, "We're receiving last transmissions." Elias nodded, "Play them." The projection flickered. Dozens of overlapping messages appeared, each from different Archon vessels, each describing a different ending. One reported total victory. Another reported immediate collapse. Another insisted the siege had never occurred. Another claimed Karos 9 had been destroyed hours ago. All of them were confident. All of them were incompatible. A scientist whispered, Their network can't converge on a single outcome anymore. Elias replied softly, "It doesn't need to." Above the moon, what remained of the Archon Dominion fleet drifted in fractured silence. Cale Vorn's command vessel was still intact, but it no longer had anything stable to command. The bridge was filled with flickering tactical displays, each showing a different version of the sky. "Stabilize the fleet," Cale ordered. A pause followed. Then a systems officer answered carefully, "We can't." Cale turned sharply. "We are still armed, we are still present, we still exist in orbit." The officer hesitated. "Yes, but not in the same orbit across all systems." Silence hit the bridge like gravity. Cale's voice lowered. "Explain that." The officer swallowed. "Some of our ships report they've already withdrawn, others report they're still engaging, a few report they were never deployed." Cale stared at him. For the first time in his life, authority had no mechanism to enforce itself. On Karos 9, Elias finally stepped away from the console. A technician approached carefully. "Sir, what happens now?" Elias looked upward, through kilometers of rock, through the fractured sky above. "The siege is over," he said. "And the Empire?" the technician asked. Elias paused. "That depends which version of it you ask." Above them, Cale Vorn stood alone on his bridge as systems began shutting down one by one, not from damage, but from irrelevance. The Fleet Coordination Network attempted one final synchronization pulse. It failed. Not catastrophically, just silently, as if the universe had stopped agreeing to participate. A final message appeared on his console. "No consensus reality, available for command execution." Cale read it twice, then once more. And for the first time since he became High Regent, he did not issue another order. Because there was nothing left that would interpret it the same way twice. On Karos 9, the Railgun system emitted one last diagnostic pulse. A technician checked it. "It's idle." Elias nodded. "It's done." "Done what?" the technician asked. Elias took a long breath before answering. "It showed them what happens when a weapon doesn't destroy the enemy." A pause. "It destroys agreement." Above the moon, the surviving Archon ships began to drift apart, not physically at first, but conceptually. Some believed the war was still ongoing and held formation. Some believed it had ended and powered down weapons. Some believed they had already returned home. All of them were acting correctly according to their own data. And none of them matched. Cale Vorn watched it all fragment from the bridge viewport. The stars themselves looked wrong now, shifted, inconsistent, unreliable. He whispered almost to himself, "We were the crowned." A long pause. "And now there is no throne that agrees we ever wore it." On Karos 9, the facility lights dimmed into standby. The Railgun network, once a weapon, now lay dormant like a solved equation no longer needed. Elias turned away from the console. Behind him, a technician spoke softly. "What do we tell the rest of the galaxy?" Elias stopped walking, then replied, "Tell them nothing." A pause. "Let them argue about what happened." He stepped into the corridor. "And fear the versions they can't agree on." Above Karos 9, space slowly returned to something resembling normality.